Hello and welcome. If you've ever tried to pick up a new language, you've definitely had that moment where you wonder, am I even doing this right? Well, today we're jumping headfirst into that messy, totally fascinating world of language learning. We're going to explore the big controversies and the questions that, believe it or not, even the experts are still arguing about.
I mean, this is the big one, isn't it? It's the question we all ask. We spend hours searching for that one perfect technique, that magic bullet that's going to unlock fluency. But what if that's the wrong question to begin with?
So there's this author, Scott Thornberry, who pretty much argues that we should just stop looking for these simple, one-size-fits-all solutions. He says that the real progress, the real understanding, comes from leaning into the complexity and just exploring the big unanswered questions. So that's exactly what we're going to do.
First up, let's get into our own heads for a minute. What is actually going on psychologically when we try to learn a new language? Because this is where some of the biggest myths and the biggest debates really live.
You've heard this a million times, I'm sure. Maybe you even took one of those online quizzes that told you you're a visual learner or, an auditory learner. It's an incredibly popular idea. It's everywhere.
And usually we get sorted into one of these three buckets: visual, oral, or auditory, and kinesthetic. Basically, do you learn best by seeing things, hearing things, or by physically doing things? The whole idea is that if teachers can just cater their lessons to these styles, then boom, learning becomes way more effective. And on the surface, that sounds perfectly logical, right? Of course you should match the teaching style to the learning style. They even have a name for it, the meshing hypothesis. But is there any real solid evidence that it actually works?
And here comes the bombshell. A huge review of studies by a team led by Harold Pashler found, nothing. No proof. Zero. Now here's the crucial thing. While we all definitely have preferences for how we like to get information, there's just no good evidence that tailoring a lesson to a specific style actually makes you learn better. Turns out, good teaching is just good teaching. It helps everyone, no matter what their supposed style is.
Okay, on to another massive debate. Should you use your first language, your mother tongue, what linguists call the L1, in the classroom? On one side, you have the immersion-only folks. They say that you have to banish your native language because that forces you to think in the new one. But on the other hand, totally ignoring a learner's L1 can feel kind of dismissive. And it means you're not using this incredibly powerful tool, the entire conceptual map of the world that our first language already gave us.
And this quote just nails that idea so beautifully. It suggests that our first language isn't some barrier we have to overcome. It's the very lens we use to see. It provides the initial windows, all the concepts and meanings that we use to start making sense of a whole new language. So, we've peeked inside the learner's mind. Now, let's shift gears and look at the raw materials of language itself. The words and the grammar. What are the absolute essential pieces you need to build fluency?
This is a question every single learner asks themselves. We all know vocabulary is important, but is there, a magic number, a critical mass of words that finally unlocks the language?
Well, it turns out research suggests there kind of is, and it's probably a lot bigger than you think. To really get to a high level of understanding, you're going to need a vocabulary of over 6,000 individual words.
So this number is what researchers call the lexical threshold. Now that 6,000 plus number comes from knowing around 1,700 core word families. So think a word like help, and all its relatives, like helpful, helpless, and helper. Once you know that many words, you can understand something like 98% of most written texts. It's the tipping point, right? It's where you can finally pick up a newspaper and actually read it without having to stop for the dictionary every other sentence.
But check this out. It gets even more interesting. You can basically split all that vocabulary into two different kinds. You've got those thousands and thousands of lexical words, the nouns, the verbs, the adjectives that carry all the meaning. But then you have this tiny little group of about 150 functor words. These are the grammar words, the little guys like of, and, the, but, that glue everything together. Mastering that small group is just unbelievably powerful.
Okay, so we've looked at the learner, and we've looked at the language. Let's turn to the last piece of this puzzle, the teaching itself. How should we actually go about helping people learn all this stuff?
For well over 100 years, language teachers and linguists have been on this epic quest for the Holy Grail, the one single best method for teaching a language. And this has led to this constant parade of new approaches, each one being sold as the final answer we've all been waiting for.
But if you look at the history of these methods, it's not some straight line of constant improvement. It's really more of a cycle. It's a pendulum swinging back and forth.
Old ideas fall out of fashion, only to pop up again a few decades later with a new name. We went from obsessively translating texts to forbidding any translation to focusing only on communication, and now we're in an era where people are questioning the very idea of having a single method at all.
So if there's no perfect method, what's the alternative? Well, the modern thinking is shifting toward a much more flexible idea, that a teacher's job isn't to follow some rigid script, but to give the right kind of support at exactly the right time. And this concept has a name. It's called scaffolding.
The term actually comes from the psychologist Jerome Bruner, and honestly, the best way to think about it is like training wheels on a bicycle. The teacher provides this temporary support that makes a really complicated task a little bit simpler. That way, the learner can focus all their energy on mastering just one tricky part. And then, once they've got it, the support, just like training wheels, is gradually taken away.
So what does that actually look like in a classroom? Well, it starts with just getting the learner interested and engaged. Then you simplify the task, you keep them focused on the main goal, and you point out the really critical things they need to notice. It's also about managing their frustration, because we all know it gets frustrating, and finally showing them what an ideal finished product looks like. It's a super dynamic, supportive process, not some fixed, boring method. So, after digging into the learner, the language, and the teaching, where does all of this leave us? Let's try to bring it all home.
All right, so what have we learned? Well, for one, we can probably all relax a little bit and let go of that rigid idea of learning styles. Second, there's just no way around it. Building a massive vocabulary is absolutely fundamental to becoming fluent. We've also seen how the search for the best method is really just that pendulum swinging back and forth. And all of this points to a new way of thinking. Let's move away from trying to find a perfect method and instead focus on providing perfect, flexible support.
And that really brings us right back to where we started. The goal isn't to find the one simple answer, because frankly, it just doesn't exist. The real journey, for both learners and for teachers, is about understanding the complexity, appreciating all the nuances, and really engaging with these big questions. So I'll just leave you with this to think about. If we accept that there are no magic bullets, no secret shortcuts, what does that actually mean for how we approach learning? How do we build learners and teachers who are not only comfortable with all this complexity, but are empowered to navigate these big questions all on their own? Now that is the real challenge.